So the book is Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present, and the subtitle is How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crises to Consolidate Control. And so I go through that the most common form of government in world history is kings. Nimrod, Pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, Tsar. And a king is basically a glorified gang leader. So the default setting for human government is gangs, tribes, clans. And a gang leader with enough weapons, right, is called a king, a pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, Tsar. And people say history repeats itself. Really, human nature repeats itself. So you put some kids in a playpen, one takes the rattle from the others. You put some kids on a playground, one's the bully hogging the ball. You put some junior high girls in a clique, one of them is the diva. You put some people in the woods, one of them is an Indian chief. Put them in an inner city, one of them is a gang leader. And so that's the norm. And as the centuries go on, with military advancements, these kings can kill more people. So instead of Cain killing Abel with a rock, they can kill with a bronze weapon, iron weapon, phalanx spear that the Greeks had, a scimitar sword that the Muslims had, gunpowder that the Chinese invented. The weapon improves, but it's that same fallen nature of Cain killing Abel. And with technological advancements, kings can track more people. 2 BC, Augustus Caesar wanted to have a worldwide tracking system. It was called the census, a tax enrollment. If he could have had 5G and cell phones and facial recognition software, he'd have been tempted to use that. And these kingdoms keep getting bigger until finally the King of England had the biggest. Sun never set on the British Empire. And America's founders didn't want this globalist king ruling us, so they broke away and flipped it and made the people the king. They got their idea from the Bible. What part of the Bible? That first 400 years out of Egypt before King Saul. It's called the Hebrew Republic. And anyway, so a republic is an attempt to take the power of the king, give it to the people. But what if the king wants the power back? Does he just ask for it? Hi, I want to be king. Give me control of your life. It's like, people aren't in a hurry to give it up. So there's two methods in which the king can take the power back: fear and free stuff. If you get people into fear, they'll panic and they'll give up their freedom for security every time. And free stuff, the government's so nice, it's giving you free stuff until you get dependent. Then you want some more free stuff, you're going to have to incrementally give up your freedom. Sort of like a drug dealer takes over a neighborhood 2 ways. Comes in with guns, gets people into fear, they panic and surrender to the mob. Or the drug dealer's so nice, he's giving away free drugs till you get hooked. Then you want some more free drugs, you're going to have to incrementally give up your freedom and sell yourself into prostitution. And so what I talk about in the book are these tactics used on a countrywide and global scale of fear and free stuff.
Yes, and I like how you said giving things away for free, one way that they hook you in, so to speak, to take over.
It sounds like you just described the last 3.5 years of the United States.
Yes.
Yeah, I was reading How to Catch Pigs in the Wild. In Texas, there's a lot of these wild pigs. And so you put a post in the ground and you throw some corn down. The pigs come, eat the corn, ignore the post. Second day, there's 2 posts in the ground. Pigs come, eat the corn, ignore the post. Third day, another post, and you start putting them in a semicircle, and then you start closing it in as a circle. Keep throwing that corn down, until finally there's just a little opening. And the pigs squeeze through the opening, eat the corn, and you shut the gate. And you caught yourself some wild pigs. And so it's this dependency. And so you see these tactics of fear and free stuff used throughout the Cold War, throughout the world. I actually go through Bible examples. So how do you get people into fear? You have to sow discord. There has to be something unsettling. And so there's a whole study of how to sow discord. And, imagine being in heaven and somebody sowing discord in heaven. Well, it happened. Lucifer, right? The word devil in Greek, diabolos, means to divide, to sow discord. And so he's cast out with 1/3 of the angels and goes into the garden and he sows discord. Adam, Blame, and Eve sows discord. Cain, kill, and Abel. And then there is the Hebrew Republic, this 400 years with no king, and Gideon defeats 100,000 Midianites. Nobody's thinking about invading Israel, but Gideon has an illegitimate son, Abimelech, and he wants power, so he goes to the town of Shechem, and he does critical race theory, right? He says, is it better for you that the sons of Gideon reign over you? Remember also that I am your flesh and your bone. And then the people say, well, we have to vote for Abimelech because he is our brother. And they go to the temple of Baalberith, the city treasury, and they take money to hire rioters, like Antifa type people, and vain and worthless persons which followed him. And to do what? To commit violence and to kill the half-brothers, the sons of Gideon. And then in the confusion, Abimelech makes himself king. So you take a country that's completely at peace, but on the inside, you sow division based on this class identity, and then you pit them against each other, and in the confusion you seize power. And so I go through Machiavelli. 500 years ago, Italy was a bunch of city-states that always fought. Machiavelli thought if one prince could control all of Italy, it would stop the infighting. So he writes a book called The Prince, where he advocates the ends justifies the means. The end of one prince controlling all of Italy is such a good end, because it'll stop the infighting, that any means necessary to get there is justified. Lie, cheat, steal. So if the prince wants to conquer a city, and the city does not want to be conquered, they would hate him. But if the prince pays criminals, like Abimelech did, to commit violence, smash windows, set things on fire, the people will panic and cry out for help, and the prince will come in and get rid of the very criminals he bribed to create the mess. Nobody will know the better for it, and everyone will praise the prince as a hero. So it's good marketing. You create the need and fill it. You go around the back of the house, set it on fire, then you go around the front of the house, sell them a fire extinguisher. And they'll pay anything for it, and even thank you for being there. So it's called Machiavellianism, where you create or capitalize on a crisis to consolidate control. Fast forward, Germany in the 1800s was not Germany. It was a bunch of kingdoms. Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony, they always fought. A guy named Hegel, University of Berlin, who had a student named Karl Marx, Hegel came up with an idea to help Frederick, the king, consolidate and conquer other kingdoms. And so he took Machiavelli, turned it into a nice, neat triangle. One corner is a thesis, opposite corner an antithesis, top corner a synthesis. Sounds complicated, it's not. You start off with the status quo, you create a problem that's real bad, everybody panics in fear, gives up their freedom to settle for an answer that's half as bad. That becomes the new starting point. You create another problem that's real bad. Everybody panics in fear, surrenders some more of their freedom to settle for an answer that's just half as bad. That becomes the new starting point. You create another problem that's real bad. Everybody panics in fear, surrenders some more of their freedom to settle for an answer that's half. And each time they settle, they're giving up their individual freedom to the state. And so it's called Machiavellianism, where you create or capitalize on a crisis to consolidate control. And so you basically take that model and apply it. The British became the biggest empire in the world. How? Did they just walk into a country and say, hi, we want to be the biggest empire in the world? Oh yeah, here are the keys. No, let's look at how they took over India. In 1714, the British opened a trading post that turned into a trading fort that turned into them having guns. And they would give guns to one kingdom, guns to another kingdom, and then stir up division between them. Right? Diabolos. They would, and they would get them to fight each other and bloody each other up and weaken each other. And then the British would come in to restore order and conquer both of the weakened kingdoms. And they did this again and again until they took over all of India, a quarter of the world's population. And so these tactics were used during the Cold War. You had, after World War II, countries in Europe were getting started, Albania, Romania, Greece, India, and they were doing republics, and the KGB did not like that. So they'd come in and do what's called critical theory. They'd observe all the groups, ethnically, racially, economically, religiously, and they would call some victims, others oppressors, haves and have-nots. They'd pit them against each other to cause this internal crisis, and then in the confusion, they would seize power and put in a Soviet puppet. And so it's, in a sense, introducing an autoimmune disease into the body politic. What's an autoimmune disease? It's where your own immune system starts attacking your own organs. You got a war going on inside of your own body. Jesus said a house divided against itself cannot stand, right? And so this is the tactic that has been used in other countries to, the Soviets would do it, and then the CIA would do it in reverse to try to get the Soviet-leaning countries to have a leader that's more American-friendly. But now we see these tactics, particularly under Obama, being used against our own population for political purposes.
You mentioned Obama. Do you mean Biden, or is it the same thing we're talking about?
Sounds the same thing to me.
Yeah, well, Obama was what's called politicizing federal agencies. So Lois Lerner, head of the IRS, met with him 147 times, and she began to use the IRS to target conservative organizations. And when it became public and they had a congressional hearing, she simply pled the fifth and walked out. And then we saw the same thing happen with the NSA and how it was used to spy on the Trump campaign, right? It was supposed to just monitor foreign threats. And then we saw the 2016, Obama signed the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Influence Act. And this allowed the federal government to monitor and control the media in America. And that's why they want to censor different voices for the sake of national security. They want to maintain their rhetoric. And so Obama had staff members carrying this out, particularly Susan Rice, Valerie Jarrett, Anita Dunn. After the election, Obama builds a headquarters down the street, and who worked for him but Valerie Jarrett, Susan Rice, Anita Dunn. When Biden gets elected, who goes back to their old positions in the White House? Valerie Jarrett, Susan Rice, Anita Dunn. And basically, Obama has had them working for him for a dozen years, and Biden just reads the teleprompter.
Yeah, very sad state of affairs for America. And they are giving things, just looking at the all of the illegals coming in. I mean, how many could there possibly be now? Those that we are aware of, with all the given monies, cell phones, all the gifts from taxpayers. Doesn't look good for America, does it? I mean, we had Hong Kong. That's another way they got into China, right, with trade. And so this isn't trade, but they're importing a new population for, I don't really understand what reasons, but they're giving them all kinds of things. What do you guys think about that? Does it sound familiar regarding Obama and so forth? Kind of, sort of.
Very compelling information. I might suggest illegals, immigrants coming in is a beautiful thing. And I'm biased because I'm a first generation U.S. I would say the regulation, the process to do this is lacking, extremely helpful when utilized correct. And one way or another, most, if not all of us, are immigrants. But I do concur with you, sir.
It's just that we don't know what the real agenda is behind all those people coming in. And so when you see someone creating a crisis and then coming and offering you a solution, that's the crisis they're creating. In communist countries, they would take your house and give it to 10 other families. And so you'd have 10 families living in a house. That meant that you were lucky if you were one family in a single room, in some cases over in the Soviet Union. So they created a crisis. They said, in the name of the people, we'll help everybody. But then all of a sudden there was a hardship and we have to do without. So they would cut things in half as far as their doling out stuff is concerned. And then you had 10 families in a house, and then you didn't own your house anymore. The state did. You didn't own anything. And so, you just kind of wonder as an American sitting here looking at things, what is the real goal behind it? And like you were saying, Bill, Machiavellian, divide and conquer, and then be the solution to be the king. Interesting. What do you think, JJ? The founding fathers went through all of this from all the different countries they came. They experienced pretty much everything and more that we experience today. What do you think regarding the First Amendment? Why do you think they wrote that first?
Well, if you look at what it says, it talks about the Congress can make no law concerning the freedom of religion, speech, the right of people to peacefully assemble, and protest against the government, list of grievances. If you were going to put the power of government back into the people's hands and say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to protect your Second Amendment by giving you, all of you, guaranteeing the right of you to keep and bear arms. Yet nobody communicates with each other. Nobody has any faith. The press is lying to you. This is being hypothetical here. And when it comes to peaceably assembling, nobody's really doing that because we don't know how. That's a really dangerous society if everybody's just got guns.
We forgot how to do that from our early days. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of insane to do that. I believe the founding fathers, geniuses in my opinion, divinely inspired,
Yes.
wrote those lines in that amendment to say, here is the guaranteed insurance policy for the American people. We'll start with this one. And as you start with the first one, then go to the second, then the third, you'll see that without the one preceding it, the next one makes no sense at all. Example, the Third Amendment, just to, no soldier can be quarantined in your house without permission from the owner. Well, if the soldier's quartered at your house, what are you going to call your congressman? No, you're going to have to be able to force the guy out of the house. There's the previous amendment takes care of that. Now, what do you do with the previous amendment? The First Amendment takes care of that, is to know what you're doing. And when, in my opinion, when it comes to being armed, I'm not necessarily talking about firearms and munitions. I mean, what Bill was holding up at the beginning of this podcast is just as powerful of a weapon as a firearm.
Yes.
It's knowledge.
Yes.
And knowledge, I believe, is that what we are seriously lacking in this country. I can blame anybody, but I always start by pointing the finger at myself. I'm sorry. I have a heavy shoulder that way. I blame everything on me. But I think a part of the solution is going to be if we decide that this whole thing collapses and we have to build it back up, we need to start with the foundational building blocks of the family and education, which spurs not from the public schools, but from the family itself. And when it comes to peaceably assembling and congregating, when I grew up, neighborhood policy was pretty much made in our church. Everybody from the neighborhood went to the church, and if there's a policy that needed to be decided on, that was taken care of in the church. And generally, it was the clergy that went to the politicians and says, here's what we want. They represented that smaller cluster of people. And it went that way. Now it's almost the other way around. And if you are speaking from a spiritual standpoint, then you should be on the FBI's watch list. So, but that's today's America, and don't you feel safer?
Well, to that, Bill, you have a book, Who is King in America? And which is a great book. You have a lot to say about that in that book. What are your comments?
Yeah, well, the founders broke away from the most powerful king that the planet had ever seen. The sun never set on the British Empire. And so when they wrote the Constitution, their big fear was they didn't want to have a repeat. And so they took the power of a king, the power of governing, and they broke it into three branches and pitted them against each other. And so the Congress would make the laws, and then the president would sign and execute the laws, and then the judicial would judge to make sure they're carried out according to the way the Constitution is. And so it was a three-way tug of war, and it was the selfishness in one branch pulling against the other two. Because James Madison said, there are no angels among us. There's no people we can trust that they're just going to be so altruistic that they wouldn't prefer their own family members. I mean, if you're in the position of dispensing stuff and you have a family member in need, you're going to be tempted to want to funnel a little extra to them on the side. It's just human nature. And so if you can prefer your family, you prefer your friends, it turns into an inside deep state. And then that gets oppressive. You want to withhold from someone you don't like. So the founders took the power of one person rule, broke it into three branches, then separated it again, federal to state level, and then tied up this federal Frankenstein with 10 handcuffs we call the first 10 amendments. Congress shall make no law. Who's limited by that? The Congress. It was the lawmaking body. If they would have seen that justices would make laws from the bench, they would have said Congress and the justices. If they would have seen presidents making laws through executive orders, they would have said Congress, the justices, and the president. But back then, only the Congress made the laws. And so they wanted to limit the federal lawmaking. In other words, they wanted to take the power of a king and scatter it. They wanted to take the Tower of Babel and scatter it.
Yes.
In other words, the Constitution, in its most basic understanding, is a way to prevent a president from ruling through mandates and executive orders. Prevent one person rule. Take the power of a king, break it. I mean, Nixon was talking about Stalin. He gave a very famous speech on communism. And he says, this is why we don't want one person rule, right? Because power is always going to concentrate, and they'll prefer their friends, turn into a hierarchical system. You're friends with the king, you're more equal. You're not friends with the king, you're less equal. You're an enemy of the king, you're dead, or you're a slave. And so we wanted to limit the government. And anyway, so I just wanted to throw that in there. So America is an experiment of taking the power of a king and scattering it amongst the people, so we get to rule ourselves. And again, the word citizen is Greek. It means co-king, co-ruler, co-sovereign. So you're a citizen of America. You are a co-ruler of America. We pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic. A republic is where the people are king, ruling through representatives. And when somebody protests the flag, what they're saying is, I don't want to be the king anymore. I protest this system where I participate in ruling myself. It's like, okay, somebody else will rule you. And so you need to have an educated and moral populace. So as JJ said, the population needs to know what the issues are. They have to be educated. And so we saw where there's a king, you don't need to educate the people. The king has an army, and he just makes people obey out of fear. But if the people are in charge, the people need to be educated. At the same time, those that have an agenda want to sway the people. And so you look at Athens, a democracy, and they didn't have a king. It wasn't like China, where the emperor had 2,000 concubines and Mandarin eunuchs that kept their harems. And if you wanted to meet the emperor to pitch your agenda, you would bribe the mandarins, and they'd arrange for you to do a meeting. But in Athens, they didn't have an emperor. It was 6,000 citizens. Well, if you have an agenda, how do you pitch your agenda to 6,000 citizens? That's when they invented theater. And they would get the whole city together, and they would put on plays, not for entertainment. They would ridicule and buffoon certain points of view and honor and extol other points of view. And if you read Aristophanes and these different playwriters in ancient Greece, it reads like Saturday Night Live. I mean, they're literally making fun of existing politicians and ribbing them. And you leave the theater saying, oh man, I feel sorry for that guy. And you're embarrassed for him, and you back away from them and everything they stood for. And then in the tragedies, they would extol virtues. So the person was so noble, and he gave his life, and he was remembered so honorably, and I want to be remembered honorably, so I want to emulate his behavior. So from that time till now, theater, media, Hollywood is always political in a country where it's the people that are in charge. And so think of your favorite sitcom or movie. There's a character you identify with. They're cute, they're funny, they're the hero. And as the series goes on, this character begins to make morally compromising decisions. A little lying here, a little cheating there, a little lust, a little revenge. And you find yourself saying, well, yeah, I know James Bond is with a woman he's not married to, but he's about to save the world. So can we get on with the story? And it minimizes something that used to be important to you, marital fidelity. And then they extol, or they call someone with old values backwards, bumpkin, simpleton, idiot, hateful. Right? If they hold old religious views, and you turn off the show and you're like, yeah, that person was old fashioned and they were pretty backwards. And you find yourself wanting to adopt the behavior of the person that you admire. I mean, that's why they get sports heroes to advertise tennis shoes, or models to sell perfume, right? Because you want to identify with them. And so we see that in a country where it's the people that are the king, whoever controls the media, the communication, right? The First Amendment rights, as what JJ was saying, whoever can control freedom of speech, freedom of the press, in a country where it's the people that are the king, the people need to be educated. They need to know what's going on to make an informed, correct decision.
Yes, and it's like George Washington warned in his farewell address, how today, we see the two political parties making the agenda and telling us what's important. And so the people lose focus in what is important as far as rule is concerned. And so then I sort of see it. My own point of view would be that the political parties are now stealing away all that stuff. We don't need to be educated because they want to go global or something like that. And they write the laws when they have their attorneys submit it to many of the congressmen. I mean, how do you get 70,000 pages in one law? Was it ever like that? I mean, I remember you were talking about constitutions. You have an interesting book about the 13 colonies and their constitutions. And but with George Washington and his warning in his farewell address, which you wrote about, Bill, he's talking about the importance of political parties' agendas overtaking the importance that the individual people have in their localities and whatnot. And would you agree things like that are happening today? Or in other words, George Washington's warning is being realized as true?
Yeah, so George Washington was the first president, and the three branches of government was an attempt to take the power of ruling and separate it. And he noticed the beginnings of parties. Now, back then, it was more or less the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists wanted a stronger central government so you could have a navy to defend us from outside attack, and you could have a stable currency so we could do foreign trade. The Anti-Federalists wanted a weaker central government because they didn't want to repeat a King George III who could rule through mandates and burn people at the stake. And so you had this struggle, and Washington said, this is dangerous because the party passions are so strong that people will, it's the team spirit. It's your alma mater. I mean, think of your high school. No matter whether the team is winning or losing, you're always going to be in favor of that team because that's your high school. That's where you went. Party passions go deeper than just a mental assent. There's an emotional attachment there. And Washington says people will be willing to take foreign help to advance their party's agenda. And the foreign government will then gain access to our government through these party passions. Now, back then, he was talking about the French and the English and their money and buying influence. But now we have China. And you have people in very high positions that are getting money from China or the Chinese-controlled media that maybe can give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And so they are exercising influence. I was reading about the China Silk Road. And these are countries in Central Asia where China wants to build this highway all the way basically from China to Europe. And they'll go into these countries and do the bribe or the bullet. In other words, if the politicians will go along and allow them entrance into those countries, they'll make sure those politicians are taken care of. If the politicians don't, well, then there's the threats of maybe giving money to political groups to get them to lose their re-election, or worse yet, there's even Chinese CCP police stations in America where if they have people that are Chinese or that are out of line, they can disappear. But they would go into these countries, do the bribe or the bullet, silver or the lead, and bribe these politicians or threaten the politicians to be able to build this highway. They do the same thing in Africa, where there's countries that have rare earth minerals and all kinds of things. They'll come in and bribe the politicians or threaten the politicians so they can mine in those countries. They do the same thing in countries all around the world, and then we see they're doing it in America. I mean, the Panama Canal. I had a chance to go down there in the 1970s and go through the canal on a ship, and it was fascinating. And then when Jimmy Carter gave away the Canal Zone, they put out bids, and Dutch companies offered to run the canal, American companies, Japanese, but China. And China came in with money under the table and bribed the politicians to give China control of the Canal Zone. And so this is a strategic choke point for world travel as well as military ships. And China's been strategically going to the Dardanelles and Bahamas and building deep water ports and a lot of strategic places around the world. And of course, they have ambitions for Taiwan. And they took Hong Kong back. And so at a time when we have people in our government and even military that are still trying to figure out if they're a boy or a girl, you have these other countries that are serious with global ambitions. And they have been playing chess while we've been playing poker. So it's a serious time for our country, but I do think that what are the times we love best? The stories, or what are the football games we like? Our team's down by 3 touchdowns. There's 2 minutes left, and they rally, and they're throwing sideline passes, and they come from behind and win. We always like to root for the underdog. What's the Bible stories we love the best? It's where God's people are in hopeless situations, and God raises up little nobodies, a Moses, a David, a Gideon. I mean, Moses was facing the most powerful military leader on the planet, the Pharaoh. The iron chariot wheel was a brand new invention, and the ones with the spokes that made it so that these things could go they were the fastest thing on earth at the time. And here's Moses totally unarmed, but he stood there holding on his staff, and the waves came in and swallowed up Pharaoh's chariots. David against Goliath, Gideon against 100,000 Midianites, and God said he had 30,000 Israelites, and God said, "Too many. Tell everyone that's scared to go home." Whittles it down to 10,000. He's outnumbered 10-1, but God said, "Still too many." Whittles it to 300, and then God says, "Watch this," and he rolls up his sleeves and defeats them. In other words, God made the odds even worse. So the stories we love the best are when it looks really, really bad and God raises up little nobodies with faith and courage to stand in the gap. And so I think every generation has a crisis, right? Attila the Hun had an army of 500,000 men wiping out cities all across Europe. And Saint Genevieve, a young woman in Paris, got all the city to fast and pray. And for some reason, Attila skipped sacking Paris. Genghis Khan conquered from Korea to Hungary, killing 30 million. I mean, if we would have lived during that time, and then you have the Spanish flu and the bubonic plague, every generation has a crisis. And this is just ours. And if we get through our current crises, there'll be another one. We get through that crisis, there'll be another one. It's sort of the human condition. And God knows that. In a sense, I think that he allows the crises so that we are pushed to have to show whose side we're on. And some people respond by running away and hiding and denying their faith and even taking the mark of the beast. How can I survive unless the government's my nanny? Right? And other people are going to say, okay, God, there's a crisis. Where do you need me? Like the early church, when they were persecuted, they prayed for boldness. It's like, okay, God, where do you need me? Okay, I'm going to go. I mean, Christians were known for running to the need and not caring about their own personals, saying, okay, I was reading in 1849, there was a cholera epidemic, killed 150,000 Americans. And in the hospitals, like in St. Louis, you had the orders of nuns. The nuns staffed the hospitals. They were the original nurses. And like 1 out of every 4 nuns would die of cholera, but they didn't care. They would just continue to work in the hospitals because their attitude was, well, we belong to the Lord. But Christians were known for running to the need. And so I think that we're facing a crisis, but it's a sifting time. And I think people like yourselves are saying, we're going to stand up. We're going to let everyone know we're on the Lord's side.
Yes. I agree. And I think that speaking back to China building the roads, that's very prophetical. When you remember Revelation, 200 million man army is going to come from East Asia and cross the Euphrates to the Jordan River Valley. Got to have roads for that. And the Chinese are also, they're taking up the power lines, infrastructure for not just roadways and throughways, but railways. And they've already done and completed work in the Netherlands, I understand. So they've started at both ends, from China all the way to the Baltic in the Netherlands. And they're connecting in between. Germany is a big part of that, where they're working there. And Armenia back and forth. There's so many things going on over there. It's almost like the land foretelling Israel's future. They're standing alone, and all of the roadways, railways, hydro power, the electric lines and infrastructure, the power grid, if you will, bypassing them. They're arguing, go here, go there. The argument is, too, if your state government cannot pay back the Chinese, and everybody knows that most of them could not, Central Asia and all of them, then the Chinese take ownership. So that was another interesting aspect of that. But prophetically speaking, looking at Bible prophecy, you can see roads and things building already. You can see, you can see the crises around the world that are shaping things up. These are our situations in America regarding immigration and the basically the uncontrol of it. And education would be something that we need. I guess we're going to have to educate ourselves, because I don't see that happening in school. Many in education today will tell you it's not about education at all anymore. It's all politicized. And but JJ, you have solutions. We were talking about solutions the other day. Do you have any solutions as far as Americans trying to educate themselves so that we're not victimized by our own educational system, which used to be local? It's now federal, but it used to be localized until the money, the gifting, as you were talking earlier, if it's trade or whatever. What do you think, JJ?
Well, first of all, I don't have enough time in this episode to go through all this, but
to the next.
always leave them with something, leave them with something wanting more.
Yeah.
The one thing we can do is get our education back to a local level. Yes. We need to look at ourselves. I think for people who like-minded individuals, like all of us, I think one of our failures and utter failures is some of the things that we focus on should not be what we're focusing on. We are allowing I will never use the word mainstream. I'll call it state-sponsored media, the narrative keepers. We let them determine the narrative. We let them determine the rules of engagement. That needs to change, where we focus on our own narratives, our own rules of engagement. We know what our standards are. We know what our moral expectations are, and we stick to them. There are certain things that happen in society. There's one in particular that came out today that I believe our side, I'm using this as an example, should spend zero time on whatsoever. And I'll just say it, that's this phenomenon known as Dylan Mulvaney. So I'll just big picture there. I believe our side should give no attention to this whatsoever. We don't even acknowledge it. Another example, I believe that other outlets such as MSNBC, for example, they live and strive on our side replaying their clips. I believe if our side didn't comment on what they say, critique what they say, nobody would even know they were out there. I do believe there is a shift in attitude in this country because everything is becoming a kitchen tabletop issue now. Everybody can see it. Everybody can see what's happening to our kids in schools. Everybody can see what's happening to their economy. Everybody can now see actually what's happening to their elections. And the people are saying, okay, we see this. We want something done, but our side, I'm not blaming the other side. Our side is not giving them answers, is not only offering solutions, but asking for solutions. And I believe these solutions are the best of solutions are within all of us. I don't have an answer. Bill doesn't have a single answer. Ramesh doesn't have a single answer. But collectively, we put our mind to it. We've learned throughout our history, one of the reasons this country became so great is because we are a republic. And being that republic, we were given the ability to think for ourselves. One of the things we've lost in this country is the art of critical thinking.
Yes.
Those of us who are critical thinkers, well, you're the ones that consider the far right-wing idiots if you think with your own brain rather than a collective hive mind. That's the difference. And that's what it's going to take. And to say, and we always say we need to make sure that people are educated. I think they're educated to a degree. You may not be educated as a teenager in your 20s, but as you get your first tax bill, have to pay your mortgage, insurance, start looking toward retirement, you suddenly become a more critical thinker. And it's that realm of the population that we have to say, not that everything's a failure and take a black pill, it's all going to you know where, but that we can fix this and it can be done. The first step is realizing that you have a problem. The second step is understanding that you must be part of the solution, not just a witness to what the problem is. There's my answer. Sticking to that.
That's a fantastic answer. I think you're absolutely right. I agree with you there. And it is the case that many Americans are looking at themselves in their own country and saying, I don't like what I see. I don't like what I experience. My living experience is a lot more terrible, not even less than it was, but terrible compared to what it was. And so we have to do something about it because nobody else is going to do it. And Ramesh, you know that. You're someone who's done a lot in your lifetime and have accomplished so much. I can never do the things that you've done. What do you think? Do you think it's too big a haul for America and all of us like-minded thinking people to put something together and do something about it, or at least present the idea for consideration and action?
Thank you, Mr. David. First off, I'd just like to say thank you for the compelling information education, Mr. Vedder, you gave, and the parallelism between biblical scripture and political over the last about 5,000 years. I do find that very compelling, very informative, and I would have to agree. Additionally, Mr. JJ, I do you hit home on a few of those. Train, educate, equip. Mr. David, my personal opinion, there's always hope if God's involved.
Yes.
So I say yes.
Yes, and that's where it's all about, looking at the Lord and following his guidance. He's already given us the answers in the good book. And well, everyone, thank you very much. Bill, do you have any closing thoughts? You have so much. You're such a brilliant guy, and you know so much about all these subjects. Your thoughts?
Well, just David and Ramesh and JJ, it's an honor to be on with you, and I'll look forward to the next time. And the book that I mentioned a little bit on is called Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present, and the subtitle is How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crises to Consolidate Control. And my website is AmericanMinute.com.
AmericanMinute.com. I recommend everyone visit that. There's so many resources there, and please donate. If you would, please donate and help Bill continue. He's such a great resource, and we're very happy to be together. I think all of us together today, and I'm looking forward to the next program too. Per your availability, Bill, and everybody. But we'll wrap it up. Thank you for being here today, everyone, and I'm looking forward to continuing. JJ, thank you. Ramesh, thank you very much. Spent a lot of time behind the scenes with me, Ramesh. Thank you. And till next time, guys. Thank you for joining us on Illuminations.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Ramesh, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Navy retired 21 years, quite a few combat deployments. I have a background in irregular warfare. I'm a very passionate Christ chaser of Jesus, and I retired 2018. I have a few publishings, nothing even in the spectrum as our host, and I'm just super honored to be on this show and this interview. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. And Jay?
Yeah, first of all, William, can we call you Bill?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. Here's my claim to fame. I play the role of a First Amendment warrior. I've been involved in all different forms of media, web, print, radio, and I'm one of the rarities out here who actually believe that the founders, when they wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, they wrote the First Amendment first for a reason. I believe it has more power than all the other ones, and I hope we'll get into that along with the other topics that we're talking about today.
Yes.